What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So here in the US, Samsung's S line of phones, like the S10 and the S10e, tend to get the most publicity and notice throughout the year, with a little bit of love thrown in for the Note line as well. But Samsung also has a really solid sort of secondary budget lineup, the A series. And this year, they've really tried to introduce these phones to the US market, even more so now than in years past. And I think their goal here is to give people who don't want to spend $1,000 on a device some more affordable options. If you live outside of the US, you're probably already familiar with these phones. These are, of course, the Samsung Galaxy A10e and A20, the cheapest A series options right now in the States, and the most up-to-date, having launched earlier this summer on some carrier networks, and now finally being available as unlocked phones from places like Amazon. Now, I personally haven't had the chance to check out any Samsung A series phones up to this point. This is my first time dabbling in this sort of budget line, but obviously I was super curious what Samsung has to offer at that $200-ish price point. So in this video, we're going to go over everything each of these phones has to offer as the least expensive of Samsung's budget devices, and hopefully by the end, you can decide if either of these phones is right for you. Of course, as always, I'll have links down below in the video description to where you can buy these phones either unlocked or through a carrier. So if you want to pick one up for yourself at their cheapest prices available, or maybe you just want to learn more, check out all the links down below in the video description for everything that you need. Now, as far as their pricing and availability, we're kind of all over the map here, but I'll try to sum it up the best I can so we have a starting point, and then we'll jump into the specs and features and everything else. Unlocked through Amazon and Samsung.com, you can pick up the smaller, cheaper A10e for $179.99. The larger, more expensive A20 retails for $249.99. There's also the A50, which is a bit more expensive, but for now I wanted to focus on the A10e and A20 since they're sort of closer in price. Now, honestly, those aren't too bad of prices up front, and those are the US versions of those devices, of course. You can opt for an international version on Amazon too if you're confident that the phone will work for you, and that'll likely save you a little bit of money. But an even better option comes in the form of some US carriers. A number of network providers will offer these phones for even cheaper if you add a plan or sign up as a new customer. You can save a bit of money if you go with Boost Mobile, which is nice, but actually, if you take a look at Metro by T-Mobile, you can get the A20 for free if you switch. So anyone going with a carrier for these phones will probably end up saving the most amount of money, and it might make these phones even more attractive for you. Of course, with their different price points, these phones offer different features and specs, and depending on how you want to use your phone, one of these devices might make more sense over the other. You're not going to get flagship specs here, that should be pretty obvious, but jam-packed inside these phones is enough power to get some decent usability for sure. The smaller 5.83-inch A10e is powered by the Exynos 7884 processor and 2GB of RAM. You also get a 3000 mAh battery inside and 32 GB of storage shipped with the phone. The larger 6.4-inch A20 has a little more power with the Exynos 7904 and 3 GB of RAM. There's also a larger 4000 mAh battery, but the same 32 GB of internal storage standard. Now, fortunately, both of these phones support expandable storage via an SD card, so that's really nice to see since 32 gigs of storage isn't really a whole lot. And one other important thing to note on the topic of batteries, the A20 supports fast charging out of the box with a 15-watt power brick, while the A10e does not. And I've got to say, even with the least expensive budget option, I'm surprised Samsung cheaped out on charging with the A10e. As far as the software and performance with these two phones, like I said, you aren't going to get future-proof flagship specs at all. But what you do get is a pretty smooth and very usable experience. All in all, the internals aren't that drastically different between the two phones anyway. Things are a bit faster on the A20, of course, like you'd expect, and that extra gig of RAM is pretty nice. But playing games and launching apps and doing anything else with these phones is a very enjoyable and smooth experience. In my time using these devices, there wasn't a moment where the phones didn't perform how I wanted them to, and yeah, they definitely can't rival my Note 10 Plus, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with what you're getting here. If your primary focus includes includes texting, social media, browsing the web, and some apps and games here and there, I think you'll be more than happy with the performance on either of these phones. One of the more drastic spec differences with these phones, though, is the screen. The A10e is a pretty small phone by 2019 standards, but if you're looking for a phone that's really easy to hold, this is your best bet. But the half an inch or so size difference is just one side of the story. The larger screen on the A20 is a Super AMOLED panel, while the smaller A10e display is a PLS TFT LCD. Interestingly enough, their resolutions are exactly the same, 1560 by 720. And if you held either of these phones in your hand by themselves, they do look good. But the difference in display technology, I think, is fairly obvious when they're side by side. The AMOLED display on the A20 is brighter and bolder with more saturation, and colors look significantly better. I think you can probably even tell that through this video. Like I said, there's nothing really wrong with the A10e's display at all, but if you're particular about the display or you're used to AMOLED, I think once you get a taste of AMOLED too, it's difficult to resort back to anything else. Aside from their size, physically these phones look pretty similar, and their materials and build are pretty much identical even at their different price points. They don't really come in any fun colors here in the US, unfortunately. You're stuck with a blue or a grayish black, but they do look good and feel great in the hand. The housing is plastic, but it's that sort of glossy, thick, hard plastic that feels nicer than it is, and it looks pretty good too. I think given their price point, you can't really expect much more than that anyway, but all in all, there isn't much to complain about. You've got identical bezels along the sides and a decent chin paired with that teardrop notch for the front camera along the top. Once again, we're not pushing the boundaries with the design, and it's certainly not competing with the edge-to-edge displays of other Samsung phones, but you still get a device that looks like it belongs in 2019 no matter which way you go. There's a headphone jack on both phones, USB-C on both phones, decent external speakers, but you'll notice once again two sort of defining features that separate the A20 from the A10e. The first is a rear fingerprint sensor on the larger A20. For me personally, this is nice, but kind of an irrelevant factor nowadays. It certainly works fine, but I don't miss it on the A10e really, with Face Unlock being available on both of these phones. The other big thing you probably already realized is that there's a dual camera setup on the A20 and just a single camera setup on the A10e. Beyond that, the specs themselves and some of the features are also pretty different. Up front, there's a 5 megapixel selfie camera on the A10e and an 8 megapixel selfie camera on the A20. And around back on the A10e, there's a single 8 megapixel rear shooter. The A20 not only has a better 13 megapixel primary lens, but also that secondary wide angle lens as well. In addition to being able to capture wide angle pictures with a broader landscape, the A20 supports shallow depth of field live focus shots with a blurred background, while the A10e does not. I don't think I need to tell you that the A20 has the all-around better camera setup from start to finish, both with hardware and with the software features. And if photos and videos are important to you, the A20 is the phone you should be looking at. So a couple other things to note. Neither of these phones support wireless charging, which is a bit of a bummer, I guess, but sort of expected given the price. And also, while I focused on the specs and features of the unlocked versions of these devices, depending on the carrier you buy them from, or really wherever you are in the world, you might find some slightly different information regarding the phones. Between the different launch dates and international versions and carrier-specific models, even GSM Arena lists some conflicting specs and information with these phones. But no matter what version you end up with, you're going to be getting basically the same device across the board, which is good. There's nothing too drastic that changes with the different versions of the phones. Now, as far as which phone I prefer, I think the A20 is the phone for me, not just because it is the better device overall, but I also think it's the better value, especially if you can take advantage of a carrier deal. That's not to say that you should avoid the A10e. I still think it's a good option, but I think the A20 is a nice balance of budget while still offering some decent features. Of course, that's just my opinion. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of these phones, and if you have either of them right now, definitely tell us about your experience. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. and I'll see you guys later.